The pristine white BMW slides through the muddy bank with a sickening splash, its headlights disappearing beneath the dark water like dying stars. Karen's screams pierce the morning air as she watches 20 years of savings vanish into the depths, but what she doesn't know is that this isn't an accident. This is justice. And the man watching from his kitchen window, coffee mug trembling in his hands, knows exactly what is done. Because sometimes, when you push a quiet neighbor too far, you discover that still Marcus Chen had always prided himself on being a reasonable man. In his 43 years, he'd weathered divorce, job loss, and the slow decay of the suburban dream with the stoic patience of someone who understood that life rarely handed out fair deals. His modest 2-story house sat on 3 acres of carefully maintained property, complete with a kidney-shaped pond that had been his one indulgence when he'd bought the place 5 years ago. The pond was his sanctuary. Stocked with koi that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, surrounded by Japanese maples he'd planted himself, it was the one place where Marcus could forget about the chaos of his life. Until Karen Morrison moved in next door. The first time she parked in his driveway, Marcus had assumed it was a mistake. New neighbors often got confused about property lines, and the realtor had probably been vague about boundaries. He'd walked over with a plate of cookies his mother had taught him to make, introduced himself, and politely explained that she'd blocked his access to the road. "Oh, this little strip." Karen had laughed, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her phone screen as she'd continued texting. "I'm sure we can work something out. I'm having a party tonight, and my guests need somewhere to park." Marcus had stood there, holding the cookies like an idiot, watching this woman with her salon-perfect blonde hair and designer athleisure wear dismiss his property as if it were communal space. I appreciate that you're settling in, but that's actually my driveway. I need to be able to get to work in the morning." "Karen," she'd corrected, finally looking up from her phone. "And don't worry about it. I'll move it super early." She hadn't moved it. Marcus had been forced to park on the street and walk a quarter-mile to his own front door, dress shoes slipping on the autumn leaves while Karen's BMW sat smugly in his driveway like a white-painted middle finger. That had been 6 months ago. Since then, the situation had escalated with the methodical precision of a carefully orchestrated war. Karen parked in his driveway when she went grocery shopping. When she hosted book club. When she had maintenance work done on her house. When she felt like it. Marcus had tried everything: polite conversations, firm boundaries, even a registered letter from his lawyer. Karen's response had been consistent: her apologetic smile, a promise to do better, and absolutely no change in behavior. "You know what your problem is, Marcus," she'd said during their last confrontation, 2 weeks ago. "You're too uptight. Learn to go with the flow. We are neighbors. We should be helping each other out." Helping each other out would be respecting my property, Marcus had replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "God, you're just like my ex-husband. Everything's a federal case with you people. You people." Marcus had walked away before he said something he couldn't take back. This morning, however, was different. Marcus had woken up to find not just Karen's BMW in his driveway, but 3 other cars belonging to her overnight guests. They'd blocked him in completely, and he had a presentation at 9 a.m. that could determine whether his struggling consulting business survived another quarter. He'd knocked on Karen's door at 7 a.m., then 7:30, then 8. No answer. He'd called her phone 6 times. Voicemail. He'd even thrown pebbles at her bedroom window like a lovesick teenager, knowing how pathetic he looked but desperate to get to work. At 8:45, Marcus had made a decision that would change everything. He'd walked to his garage, fired up his riding mower, and carefully moved it to the edge of his property. Then he'd begun systematically removing the wooden barrier posts that separated his driveway from the gentle slope leading down to his pond. The posts had been decorative, really. Placed there by the previous owner to mark the boundary between the paved driveway and the natural landscape. Marcus had always thought they were unnecessary. The slope was gentle enough that any reasonable person would see where solid ground ended and the muddy bank began. But Karen's guests weren't reasonable people. They were city folks who'd driven out to the suburbs for a weekend retreat, people who probably thought food came from grocery stores and water came from faucets. People who wouldn't necessarily notice that the nice flat area where they'd parked their cars was actually a carefully maintained grass slope designed to drain rainwater into the pond below. Marcus had finished removing the posts just as the sun crested the tree line. Then he'd gone inside, made coffee, and waited. At 9:15, Karen's front door opened. She emerged wearing a silk robe and designer slippers, her hair perfect despite having just woken up. Behind her, Marcus could see her weekend guests, 3 women who looked like they'd stepped out of a yoga studio catalog, all clutching coffee mugs and laughing about something. "Ladies, I am so sorry about the parking situation," Karen was saying, her voice carrying across the morning air. "My neighbor is just super anal about his precious driveway. But don't worry, I'll talk to him. He'll get over it." The women had tittered appreciatively, making sympathetic noises about difficult neighbors. Marcus had watched from his kitchen window as Karen strutted toward her car, keys jangling in her hand. She'd been halfway to the BMW when she'd noticed the missing posts. She'd said, pausing to look at the gaps in the decorative border. "That's weird." But she'd kept walking because Karen Morrison was the kind of person who assumed the world would rearrange itself to accommodate her needs. She'd clicked her key fob and the BMW had chirped obediently. Marcus had held his breath. Karen had opened the driver's side door and slid into the leather seat, her movements graceful and confident. She'd started the engine, checked her makeup in the rearview mirror, and put the car in reverse. The BMW had backed up smoothly, its tires finding purchase on the grass slope that led down to the pond. For a moment, Marcus had thought his plan wouldn't work. The ground seemed solid enough. Then Karen had turned the wheel. The BMW's rear tires had hit the soft earth at the pond's edge, and Marcus had watched in fascination as the laws of physics took over. The car had lurched backward, its rear bumper kissing the water surface. Karen had gunned the engine, trying to pull forward, but the wheels had only spun uselessly in the mud. "What the hell?" Karen had shouted, her voice rising to a pitch that sent birds fleeing from the nearby trees. The BMW had continued its slow, inexorable slide into the pond. Water had crept up the rear windshield, then the side windows. Karen had abandoned the car just as the water reached the door handles, scrambling out in her silk robe and designer slippers, her perfect hair finally disheveled. "Help!" she'd screamed, turning toward Marcus's house. "Somebody help me!" Marcus had taken a sip of his coffee and watched as Karen's $20,000 car settled into the pond with a sound like a contented sigh. The koi had scattered in all directions, their golden forms flashing through the murky water like living coins. Karen had stood on the bank, her robe dripping, her face a mask of shock and rage. Behind her, her weekend guests had emerged from the house, their yoga-toned bodies frozen in various poses of disbelief. "Marcus!" Karen had screamed, her voice echoing across the water. "Marcus, you bastard! What did you do?" Marcus had opened his kitchen window, leaning out with his coffee mug in hand. "Good morning, Karen," he'd called pleasantly. "I see you've discovered my pond." "You did this," she'd shrieked, pointing at the submerged BMW. "You moved the posts." The posts were on my property," Marcus had replied calmly. "I had every right to remove them. And you had every right to park wherever you wanted. You just chose poorly." Karen had turned to her guests, her eyes wild with fury. "Did you see what he did? He sabotaged my car." But her friends had already begun backing away. City people understood liability, even if they didn't understand rural property disputes. They'd mumbled awkward excuses and retreated to Karen's house, leaving her alone on the muddy bank with her sinking car and her ruined morning. Marcus had closed the window and finished his coffee in peace. Through the glass, he'd watched Karen pace back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising and falling in increasingly frantic conversations with insurance companies, police dispatchers, and what sounded like her lawyer. The BMW had settled deeper into the pond, its roof barely visible above the waterline. The koi had returned, swimming curiously around their new artificial reef. For the first time in 6 months, Marcus had felt something approaching peace. Then Karen had started walking toward his front door, and Marcus had realized that his war with his neighbor had only just begun. The pounding on Marcus's front door sounded like gunshots in the quiet morning air. Each blow reverberated through the house with the fury of someone who just watched their life savings disappear beneath murky water. "Marcus! Open this door. Right now." Marcus set his coffee mug down carefully on the kitchen counter, his hands steadier than they'd been in months. Through the window, he could see Karen's friends huddled on her porch, their weekend retreat officially ruined. One of them was already loading her overnight bag into a silver Prius, clearly eager to distance herself from whatever legal nightmare was about to unfold. "I know you're in there." Karen's voice cracked on the last word, raw with desperation and rage. "You can't hide from this." Marcus walked to the front door, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. He could see Karen's silhouette through the frosted glass, a blur of wet silk and barely contained violence. Her fists continued their assault on the door, each impact sending vibrations through the frame. "Hello, Karen," Marcus said through the door, his voice calm and measured. "You seem upset." The pounding stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, Marcus could hear water dripping from Karen's soaked robe onto his welcome mat. "Open this door," Karen said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Open it right now, or I swear to God you'll what?" Marcus interrupted. "Park in my driveway. I think we've established that's not going to work out for you anymore. You destroyed my car." Karen shrieked, her composure finally cracking completely. "That BMW was worth $30,000. My insurance doesn't cover whatever the hell this is." "This is your car in my pond," Marcus replied pleasantly. "And technically, you destroyed it yourself. I simply exercised my property rights." Through the glass, Marcus watched Karen's shape double over, her shoulders shaking. For a moment, he thought she might be crying. Then she straightened and he realized she was laughing, a high, hysterical sound that made his skin crawl. "You think you're so clever," she said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that was somehow more terrifying than her screaming. "You think you've won something here. But you have no idea what you've just done to yourself." Marcus felt the first flutter of unease in his chest. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you just committed a felony, Marcus. Destruction of property. Malicious mischief. And when my lawyer gets finished with you, you're going to lose this house, that precious pond, and everything else you think you own." "I didn't touch your car," Marcus said, his voice beginning to lose its steady calm. "You parked it where you chose to park it. The fact that you chose poorly isn't my problem. You moved the posts." Karen snapped. "You deliberately created a hazard on your property and then failed to warn me about it. That's gross negligence at minimum, and if I can prove intent, which I can, it's criminal." Marcus's stomach dropped. He'd been so focused on the satisfaction of watching Karen's car sink that he hadn't considered the legal implications of his actions. In his mind, he'd simply been removing decorative elements from his own property. But Karen was right, he'd known exactly what would happen when those posts came down. "Open the door, Marcus," Karen said, her voice now deadly quiet. "We need to talk about how you're going to make this right." Against his better judgment, Marcus turned the deadbolt and opened the door. Karen stood on his threshold like an avenging angel, her silk robe clinging to her body, her perfect hair hanging in wet strands around her face. Her makeup had run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks, but her eyes blazed with a fury that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. "There we go," she said, pushing past him into his living room. "Much better." Marcus closed the door, his hands trembling slightly. "Karen, I think we should shut up," she said, spinning to face him. "I'm talking now. You've had your fun, Marcus. You've had your little moment of triumph. But now we are going to discuss reality." She walked to his mantelpiece, her wet slippers leaving dark prints on his hardwood floors. Her fingers trailed along the framed photos of his daughter, his ex-wife, his parents. Marcus felt violated watching her touch his personal belongings, but he didn't dare tell her to stop. "Nice family," Karen said, picking up a photo of Marcus's 10-year-old daughter, Emma. "She's pretty. What's her name?" "Put that down," Marcus said, his voice sharpening with genuine fear. "Emma, right?" Karen continued, ignoring his demand. I remember you mentioning her. She visits every other weekend. Lives with her mother in the city. Karen, I'm warning you, you're warning me. Karen laughed, setting the photo down with exaggerated care. You're warning me. That's rich. Marcus. That's really fucking rich. She moved to his couch, settling into the cushions as if she owned the place. Her robe had fallen open slightly, revealing more of her body than Marcus wanted to see, but she made no attempt to cover herself. Everything about her posture screamed dominance, ownership, control. Here's what's going to happen, she said, crossing her legs. You're going to call a tow truck, the most expensive one you can find, and you're going to pay to have my car pulled out of that pond. Then you're going to pay for all the damage. Engine, interior, electronics, everything. And then you're going to pay for a replacement vehicle while mine is being repaired. Marcus stared at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. Are you insane? I'm not paying for. Yes, you are, Karen interrupted. Because if you don't, I'm going to destroy your life. I'm going to sue you for every penny you have. I'm going to file criminal charges. I'm going to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you are. What kind of person am I? Marcus asked, his own anger finally beginning to surface. The kind who sabotages his neighbors. The kind who can't be trusted. The kind who creates dangerous situations that could hurt innocent people. Karen's smile was sharp as a blade. Do you think your consulting business will survive when word gets out? Do you think your ex-wife will want Emma spending weekends with a man who's been charged with reckless endangerment? The blood drained from Marcus's face. Emma was the one good thing left in his life, the only relationship that had survived his divorce intact. The thought of losing his weekends with her, of having to explain to a 10-year-old why daddy couldn't see her anymore, made him feel physically sick. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Karen pulled out her phone, its screen miraculously undamaged despite her pondside adventure. I've already called the police. They are sending someone out to take a report. I've also contacted my insurance company, my lawyer, and 3 different news stations. This is going to be a very public story, Marcus. Local man sabotages neighbor's car in property dispute. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. The satisfaction of watching Karen's car sink was evaporating, replaced by a growing sense of panic. He'd acted impulsively, driven by months of frustration and anger, and now he was going to lose everything. What do you want? He asked quietly. I already told you what I want, Karen said, her voice softening into something almost seductive. I want you to make this right. Pay for the damage. Accept responsibility. And maybe, I'll consider being reasonable about the criminal charges. I don't have $30,000, Marcus said. I'm barely keeping my business afloat as it is. Then you'll figure it out, Karen replied. Sell something. Mortgage the house. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to do it. The sound of sirens in the distance made both of them freeze. Karen's smile widened as the noise grew closer. That would be the police, she said, standing up and readying her robe. I suppose I should go change into something more appropriate for giving my statement. After all, I'm the victim here. She walked toward the door, then paused, looking back at Marcus with something that might have been pity. You know what the funny thing is, she said. If you'd just let me park in your driveway once in a while, none of this would have happened. All you had to do was be neighborly. But you had to be difficult. You had to make everything a fight. I wasn't making anything a fight, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. I was just trying to protect what was mine. And look how well that worked out for you, Karen said, opening the door. Enjoy explaining to your daughter why daddy's going to jail. She stepped out into the morning sunlight, leaving Marcus alone with his rapidly crumbling world. Through the window, he could see the police car turning into his driveway, its red and blue lights painting his living room in alternating colors of danger and disaster. Marcus slumped into his chair, his head in his hands. The koi pond that had been his sanctuary was now his prison, and the car resting at its bottom was the key to his cell. Karen had been right about one thing: he really had no idea what he'd done to himself. But as he watched Karen walk across his lawn to meet the police, her hips swaying with renewed confidence, Marcus realized something that filled him with a cold, calculating rage. She'd made one crucial mistake. She'd threatened his daughter. And that changed everything. Officer Rebecca Martinez had been working domestic disputes for 8 years, and she could smell the real story beneath the surface before she'd even stepped out of her patrol car. The call had come in as property destruction and neighbor harassment. But the tremor in the complainant's voice suggested something far more complex. The scene told its own story. A pristine white BMW sat half-submerged in an ornamental pond, its rear end completely underwater while the front bumper rested on the muddy bank like a dying whale. Koi fish swam lazily around the vehicle, apparently unbothered by their new artificial reef. The property was immaculate otherwise: manicured lawn, carefully maintained landscaping, the kind of place where every blade of grass had been considered. Officer Martinez. The blonde woman approaching her was stunning in that high-maintenance way that usually spelled trouble. She'd changed into designer jeans and a silk blouse, her hair now perfectly styled despite the morning's aquatic adventure. "I'm Karen Morrison. I'm the one who called." Martinez nodded, pulling out her notepad. "Tell me what happened, Ms. Morrison." "It's Mrs. Morrison," Karen corrected with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And what happened is that my neighbor deliberately sabotaged my car. He removed safety barriers from his property and then failed to warn me about a dangerous condition he'd created." "Aha." Martinez looked around the scene, taking in the gaps where fence posts had obviously been removed. "And where were you parked?" "In his driveway," Karen said without hesitation. "We have an understanding about parking. I sometimes use his driveway when I have guests, and he's never had a problem with it before." Martinez made a note. 8 years of experience had taught her that the phrase "never had a problem with it before" was usually code for "he's complained about it constantly, but I've ignored him." She looked toward the modest house where she could see a man's silhouette in the window. "And the homeowner is Marcus Chen. He lives alone, mostly. His daughter visits sometimes." Karen's voice took on a concerned tone. "I'm honestly worried about his mental state. This kind of behavior, it's not normal." "I'll need to speak with him," Martinez said. "But first, can you walk me through exactly what happened this morning?" Karen's story was polished, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed it. She'd been a guest in her own home, she explained, hosting a weekend retreat for her book club. When she'd gone to move her car this morning, she'd discovered that Marcus had removed the decorative posts that normally marked the boundary between his driveway and the landscaping. Without warning or notification, he'd created a hazard that had caused her vehicle to slide into the pond. "He was watching," Karen added, her voice trembling slightly. "I could see him in his kitchen window, just watching my car sink. He didn't try to help. He didn't call for assistance. He just watched." Martinez nodded, making notes. The story was plausible, but something felt off. The woman was too composed, too prepared. And there was something about the way she kept glancing toward the house, as if she were performing for an audience. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Chen now," Martinez said. "Will you be available if I have follow-up questions?" "Of course," Karen said. "I'm not going anywhere. Unlike some people, I actually care about resolving this situation properly." Martinez walked toward the house, her footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. The man who answered the door looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped the door frame. "Mr. Chen. I'm Officer Martinez. I need to ask you some questions about what happened this morning." "I suppose you do," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come in." The house was neat but lived in, with the kind of comfortable disorder that suggested someone who'd given up on impressing visitors. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, and Martinez noticed several pictures of a young girl who looked like she adored her father. "Tell me about the posts," Martinez said, settling into a chair across from Marcus. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with exhaustion. "I removed them this morning." They were on my property and I had every right to remove them. But I knew what would happen when Karen tried to back her car out. The honesty was refreshing. Martinez had expected denials, excuses, legal posturing. Instead, she was getting a confession. "Why did you remove them?" she asked. "Because I was angry," Marcus said simply. "Because for 6 months, Karen has been parking in my driveway whenever she feels like it. Because I've asked her to stop, begged her to stop, and she just laughs and does it anyway. Because this morning she blocked me in completely and I missed the most important meeting of my career." Martinez made notes. This was the other side of the story, the long build-up of frustration that had led to this morning's events. "Did you ever document these parking incidents?" she asked. Marcus laughed bitterly. "Document them? Officer, I have photos, time-stamped emails, registered letters from my lawyer. I have 6 months of documentation showing that Karen Morrison has been trespassing on my property regularly and she's never faced any consequences for it. Why didn't you call the police?" "Because they are parking violations, misdemeanors. And Karen always moved her car before anyone could respond. She's not stupid, Officer Martinez. She knew exactly how far she could push without facing real consequences." Martinez felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with complicated domestic situations. Both parties had legitimate grievances, but the law was clear about proportional response. You couldn't destroy someone's car just because they'd been parking in your driveway. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you directly. Did you remove those posts with the intention of causing damage to Ms. Morrison's vehicle?" Marcus looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "Yes. I knew exactly what would happen. I planned it. I executed it. And for about 20 minutes, I thought I was finally getting justice. And now I realize I've destroyed my life over a parking space." Martinez closed her notepad. The confession made her job easier in some ways, but it also made the situation more tragic. Marcus Chen wasn't a criminal, he was a man who'd been pushed to his breaking point and had made a catastrophically poor decision. "Mr. Chen, I need to inform you that you're likely to face charges for destruction of property. The value of the vehicle puts this in felony territory. You should contact a lawyer immediately." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "Karen already explained that to me. She's also made it clear that she intends to pursue this aggressively." "What do you mean?" "She's threatened to make sure I lose custody of my daughter. She's going to destroy my business, my reputation, everything I have left." Marcus's voice cracked. "All because I wanted to park in my own driveway." Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. The woman outside had seemed concerned, sympathetic even. But this suggested a level of vindictiveness that went beyond simple property damage. "Mr. Chen, has Ms. Morrison threatened you directly?" "She was in my house 20 minutes ago, telling me exactly how she was going to ruin my life if I didn't pay for her car. She picked up pictures of my daughter, Officer Martinez. She knows Emma's name, knows her schedule, knows where she goes to school." Now Martinez was paying attention. Property disputes were one thing, but threats involving children changed the entire dynamic. "I need you to write down everything she said to you," Martinez said. "Word for word, if you can remember it. And I need you to do it before I go back out there." Marcus looked confused. "Why?" "I'm the one who destroyed her car. I'm the one who's going to jail." "Maybe," Martinez said. "But threatening someone's child custody as leverage in a property dispute, that's extortion, Mr. Chen. And extortion is a felony too." For the first time since she'd arrived, Martinez saw a flicker of hope in Marcus's eyes. He reached for a pen and paper, his hands steadier now that he had something concrete to do. Outside, Karen Morrison was pacing beside her submerged BMW. Her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking rapidly, gesturing with her free hand, her voice carrying across the water. "I don't care what it costs," she was saying. "I want him destroyed. Criminally, financially, personally. I want him to lose everything." Martinez stepped back into the shadow of the house, listening. Of course I can prove intent, Karen continued. I'll say he threatened me, that I feared for my safety. I'll say he's been harassing me for months. Small-town cops aren't exactly brilliant, and juries love a victim. Martinez felt her jaw tighten. In 8 years of police work, she'd developed a reliable instinct for separating victims from predators. And right now, she was looking at a predator who'd finally made the mistake of underestimating her prey. She walked back into the house, where Marcus was finishing his written statement. Mr. Chen, she said, I think you should know that your neighbor is currently on the phone discussing how she plans to lie to the police and commit perjury in court. Would you be interested in hearing exactly what she's saying? Marcus looked up from his writing, and Martinez saw something new in his expression. Not hope, exactly, but something harder. Something that suggested Marcus Chen might not be as defeated as he'd seemed. Very interested, he said. Good. Because I think it's time. Karen Morrison learned that still waters run deep, and some people are. Officer Martinez had worked enough domestic cases to know that the most dangerous moment in any dispute was when the aggressor realized they were losing control. As she watched Karen Morrison pace beside her submerged BMW, still talking rapidly into her phone about destroying Marcus Chen's life, Martinez felt the familiar tightening in her gut that meant violence was coming. I need to ask you to stay inside for a few minutes, she told Marcus, who was standing by his kitchen window watching Karen's increasingly agitated gestures. And I need you to call your lawyer. Right now. I don't have a lawyer, Marcus said. His voice hollow. You can't afford not to have one, Martinez interrupted. This situation is about to get very complicated, and you're going to need professional representation. Marcus nodded, reaching for his phone. Outside. Karen had finished her call and was walking toward the house, her face flushed with anger and adrenaline. Officer Martinez. Karen called out, her voice carrying that syrupy sweetness that Martinez had learned to recognize as a warning sign. I hope Mr. Chen is being cooperative. I'd hate for this to get more complicated than it needs to be. Martinez stepped out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind her. Ms. Morrison, I need to ask you some follow-up questions about your statement. Of course, Karen said, her smile bright and predatory. I'm happy to help however I can. You mentioned that you have an understanding with Mr. Chen about parking in his driveway. Can you elaborate on that? Karen's smile wavered for just a moment. Well, it's not formal or anything. It's just neighborly courtesy. Marcus has never complained about it before. Never. Never seriously, Karen amended. You know how men can be about their property. They get territorial. But he's never actually asked me to stop. Martinez made a note, though she'd already read Marcus's detailed statement about months of requests, complaints, and legal letters. And this morning, when you discovered the posts had been removed, what did you do? I was shocked, of course. I had no idea the area was dangerous. If Marcus had warned me, I never would have parked there. Did you speak to Mr. Chen before? Or after the incident? Karen's eyes sharpened. After. I was upset, naturally. My car was ruined and I needed to understand what had happened. And what did he say to you? He was very hostile, Karen said, her voice taking on a wounded quality. He seemed pleased that my car had been damaged. He said I deserved it for parking in his driveway. Martinez nodded, writing down the lie. Ms. Morrison, I need to inform you that deliberately providing false information to a police officer is a criminal offense. I'm not providing false information, Karen snapped, her mask slipping for the first time. I'm telling you exactly what happened. Are you? Martinez closed her notepad and looked directly at Karen. Because I have a very detailed written statement from Mr. Chen that tells a different story. And I also have some concerns about statements you made to him this morning. Karen's face went pale. What kind of statements? Statements about his daughter. About his business. About how you plan to destroy his life if he didn't pay for your car. Martinez's voice was professionally neutral, but her eyes were cold. Those sound like extortion threats to me. That's ridiculous, Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. I never threatened anyone. I simply explained the legal consequences of his actions. Did you enter his home without permission? He invited me in. Did you handle his personal belongings? Pick up photographs of his family? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. We were just talking. I was upset. My car was underwater and he was acting like it was funny. Ms. Morrison, I'm going to need you to step over here, Martinez said, gesturing toward her patrol car. We need to have a more formal conversation. About what? Karen's voice was rising, the careful control finally cracking. I'm the victim. Here. He destroyed my car. He planned it, he executed it, and now you're treating me like I'm the criminal. No one's treating you like a criminal, Martinez said calmly. But I have some questions about your conduct this morning, and I need to ask them officially. Karen looked around wildly, as if seeking escape. Her gaze fell on Marcus's house, and Martinez saw something ugly flash across her face. This is bullshit, Karen said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This is small-town police protecting their own. You're all probably friends, right? You all drink at the same bar, go to the same church. Ms. Morrison, I know how this works, Karen continued, her voice gaining strength as her anger built. You're going to protect the man and blame the woman. You're going to make excuses for his criminal behavior and find ways to punish me for being the victim. Martinez felt her patience evaporating. Ms. Morrison, I'm going to ask you one more time to step over to my patrol car so we can discuss this calmly. No, Karen said flatly. I'm done talking to you. I'm calling my lawyer and I'm calling the state police. This is corruption and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. She pulled out her phone, but Martinez was faster. Ms. Morrison, you're under arrest for making false statements to a police officer and suspicion of extortion. What? Karen's voice was a shriek of disbelief. You can't arrest me. I'm the victim. You have the right to remain silent, Martinez continued, pulling out her handcuffs. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Karen backed away, her face twisted with rage. This is insane. You're arresting me for calling out a crime. For demanding justice. You have the right to an attorney, Martinez said, advancing slowly. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. I'll sue you, Karen snarled. I'll sue this department, this town, everyone involved in this travesty. When I'm finished with you people, you'll be lucky to have jobs cleaning toilets. Martinez had dealt with enough entitled suspects to know that the threats were just beginning. But as she approached Karen with the handcuffs, she noticed something that made her pause. Karen's eyes had gone flat and cold, the mask of civilization finally dropping completely. This wasn't just anger or frustration, this was the look of someone who'd been pushed past their breaking point and was about to do something irreversible. Ms. Morrison, Martinez said, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon, I need you to calm down and put your hands behind your back. Go to hell, Karen said, and then she was moving, not toward Martinez but toward the house where Marcus was watching from the window. Martinez lunged after her, but Karen was already at the front door, her fists pounding against the wood with the fury of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Marcus, she screamed, her voice raw with hatred. You coward. Come out here and face me. Inside the house, Marcus stepped back from the window, his phone pressed to his ear. Martinez could hear him speaking rapidly to someone, hopefully his lawyer, or maybe emergency services. Ms. Morrison, step away from the door, Martinez ordered, her weapon now drawn but pointed at the ground. You're only making this worse. For yourself. Karen spun around, her face contorted with rage. Worse? How could it possibly be worse? You've already decided to protect your friend and ruin my life. What's left to lose? Your freedom, Martinez said simply. Your future. Your ability to see your own family. Walk away from this and we can still work something out. For a moment, Karen seemed to consider this. Then her gaze fell on the submerged BMW and Martinez saw the last vestige of reason leave her eyes. You know what? Karen said, her voice suddenly calm. You're right. I don't have anything left to lose. She reached into her purse and Martinez saw the glint of metal in her hand. Not a gun, something smaller, more intimate. A knife. Ms. Morrison, drop the weapon, Martinez commanded, raising her pistol. Drop it now. Karen looked at the knife in her hand as if seeing it for the first time. I bought this for protection, she said conversationally. After my divorce. My ex-husband used to threaten me, and I swore I'd never be helpless again. You're not helpless, Martinez said, keeping her voice steady. You have choices. Make the right one. Karen looked up at her, and Martinez saw something that might have been sanity flicker in her eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought the woman might actually surrender. Then Karen turned back to the door and raised the knife. Marcus, she screamed, bringing the blade down against the wood. You want to destroy my life? Let's see how you like it. The knife bit deep into the door, and Karen wrenched it free, raising it again. Martinez could hear Marcus inside the house, his voice sharp with panic as he spoke to the emergency dispatcher. This is Officer Martinez requesting immediate backup, she said into a radio. I have a suspect with a knife threatening a homeowner. Send everyone you have. Karen brought the knife down again, and this time the blade stuck. As she struggled to pull it free, Martinez saw her chance and took it. The tackle sent both women sprawling across the porch, Karen's knife clattering away across the wooden boards. Karen fought like a wild animal, her perfectly manicured nails raking across Martinez's face as she struggled to break free. You don't understand, Karen panted as Martinez fought to get the handcuffs on her. He destroyed everything. My car, my reputation, my life. He has to pay. The only person who has to pay, Martinez said, finally getting the cuffs secured, is you. 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood at his kitchen window with his morning coffee, watching his daughter Emma feed the koi. The fish had multiplied since Karen's BMW had been hauled out of the pond, as if the disruption had somehow made the ecosystem stronger. Emma giggled as the largest koi, a brilliant orange and white specimen she'd named Justice, rose to the surface to nibble at her fingertips. Dad, Justice is getting huge, Emma called out, her 10-year-old voice bright with wonder. Do you think he remembers the car? Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in months. I think he's grateful for the adventure. The legal aftermath had been more complex than anyone had anticipated. Karen's arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, extortion, and filing false police reports had dominated the local news for weeks. Her perfectly crafted narrative of victimhood had crumbled under scrutiny, revealing a pattern of manipulation and intimidation that stretched back years. Marcus's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Vance who'd taken his case pro bono after seeing the news coverage, had argued successfully that his actions, while legally wrong, had been the desperate response of a man driven to his breaking point by months of systematic harassment. The felony charges had been reduced to a misdemeanor, with Marcus receiving community service and a fine that, while substantial, wouldn't bankrupt him. Karen, on the other hand, was currently serving 18 months in county jail. The irony, Patricia had explained during their final meeting, is that if she'd just apologized and offered to split the cost of removing her car, you probably would have been the one facing serious charges. But the moment she walked into your house and started making threats, she became the aggressor. The real revelation had come during Karen's psychological evaluation for sentencing. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the court-appointed psychiatrist, had diagnosed Karen with narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features, a clinical way of saying she was a predator who viewed other people as objects to be manipulated or obstacles to be removed. People like Ms. Morrison, Dr. Mitchell had explained to the judge, often appear charming and reasonable to casual observers. But they are incapable of recognizing other people's rights or boundaries. When their control is challenged, they escalate until they either regain dominance or destroy themselves in the attempt. The investigation into Karen's background had revealed a trail of destruction stretching back decades. 3 previous neighbors who'd filed harassment complaints. 2 restraining orders from ex-boyfriends. A bankruptcy that had conveniently eliminated debts to a dozen small businesses. A pattern of predatory behavior that had finally found a victim who fought back. Marcus's consulting business, rather than being destroyed, had actually benefited from the publicity. The story of the quiet man who'd stood up to his bullying neighbor had resonated with potential clients who were tired of being pushed around by larger competitors. His revenue had doubled in the 6 months since the incident. But the real victory was simpler than that. Emma splashed into the house, her sneakers squelching with pond water. "Dad, can we add more fish next spring? Justice needs some friends." "We'll see," Marcus said, tousling her damp hair. "But first you need to change clothes. Your mom's picking you up in an hour." As Emma thundered upstairs, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. His ex-wife, Sarah, checking in as she did every few weeks since the incident. "How are you holding up? Emma seems happy." "We are both good," Marcus replied. "Better than we've been in a long time." "I'm proud of you," came the response. "For fighting back. For protecting what mattered." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Sarah had been furious when she'd first heard about the car incident, terrified that Marcus's actions would endanger his custody rights. But as the truth about Karen's behavior had emerged, her anger had transformed into something like respect. "You know what the strangest part is," she'd said during their last conversation. "I always thought you were too passive, too willing to let people walk over you. I never realized that quiet people can be the most dangerous when they finally decide they've had enough." A knock at the front door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus opened it to find Officer Martinez, now Detective Martinez after her promotion, holding a manila envelope. "Mr. Chen," she said with a professional smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just enjoying a quiet morning," Marcus replied. "Please, come in." Martinez stepped into the living room, glancing around with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen how quickly domestic tranquility could turn violent. "I wanted to deliver this personally," she said, handing him the envelope. "It's the final report on the Morrison case. Everything's officially closed." Marcus opened the envelope, scanning the legal documents that formally ended the nightmare that had begun with a simple parking dispute. "How is she doing?" he asked. "Karen." Martinez's expression was carefully neutral. "She's adjusting to incarceration. Her lawyer filed an appeal, but it was denied. She'll serve the full sentence. And after that, she'll be on probation for 2 years. No contact orders with you and your family. If she violates them." Martinez shrugged. "Let's just say she's learned that small-town cops aren't as stupid as she assumed." Marcus nodded, setting the papers aside. "Detective, can I ask you something? That day, when you heard her on the phone, did you know how it was going to end?" Martinez was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I knew she was dangerous," she said finally. "People like Karen Morrison, they are predators. They survive by finding victims who won't fight back. But when they finally encounter someone who refuses to be victimized, they don't know how to process it. They escalate until they destroy themselves." "You think I'm not a victim?" "I think you're a survivor," Martinez said. "There's a difference. Victims accept what happens to them. Survivors fight back, even when the cost is high." Through the window, they could see Emma by the pond, talking animatedly to the koi as if they were old friends. The sight filled Marcus with a contentment he'd thought he'd lost forever. "The strange thing," Marcus said, "is that I don't regret what I did. I know I should feel guilty about destroying her car, about escalating the situation. But when I watch Emma playing by that pond, when I see her happy and safe, I'd do it again." Martinez nodded. "Good neighbors respect boundaries. Bad neighbors test them. And dangerous neighbors." She gestured toward the police report. "Dangerous neighbors eventually discover that some boundaries can't be crossed without consequences." After Martinez left, Marcus stood in his driveway, looking at the space where Karen's BMW had once sat like a white-painted declaration of war. The area had been reseeded with grass, and new decorative posts marked the boundary between his property and the slope down to the pond. But these posts were different. Heavier. Deeper. With concrete foundations that would take serious equipment to remove. Emma burst out of the house, changed into dry clothes and carrying her overnight bag. "Ready, Dad?" Sarah's car pulled into the driveway, carefully staying within the clearly marked boundaries, and Emma ran to hug her mother. As they loaded her bag into the trunk, Emma turned back to Marcus. "Dad. Next weekend, can we build a little bridge over the pond so Justice and his friends can swim under it?" Marcus looked at his daughter, then at the pond where golden fish moved like living coins through the clear water. The BMW was gone, hauled away months ago by an expensive tow truck that Karen had paid for from her jail commissary account. All that remained was the ecosystem that had been there before her arrival, stronger now, more resilient, marked by the experience but not defined by it. "I think that's a perfect idea," Marcus said. "Justice deserves a bridge." As Sarah's car disappeared down the road, Marcus walked to the edge of his pond. The koi rose to the surface, their movements creating ripples that spread outward in perfect circles before disappearing into the depths. Still waters, Marcus thought, watching the fish dance beneath the surface. Still waters run deep. And sometimes, when you disturb them enough, they rise up and reclaim what was always theirs. In the distance, a white BMW sat in an impound lot, its engine ruined by pond water, its interior destroyed by mud and fish. It would eventually be sold for scrap, its metal recycled into something useful. But the pond remained, clear and deep. And eternal, waiting for the next person foolish enough to test its boundaries. Justice had a very long memory,